It's Patrick Hutzel from Intensive Care at Home, where we provide tailor-made solutions for long-term ventilated adults and children with tracheostomies whilst providing quality care, and where we also provide tailor-made solutions for hospitals and intensive care units to save money and resources, and where we provide win-win situations for all of our stakeholders and clients. So in last week's blog I talked about we want our dad to be out of ICU, but we don't want him in a nursing home because they can't look after a ventilator and tracheostomy. What should we do? You can check out last week's blog by clicking on the link below this video. In today's blog I want to talk about a situation that we see many times and over again, unfortunately, in our line of work with intensive care at home. And the question and the subject today is it true that support workers can't handle safely ventilated patients with tracheostomies at home? So some families actually come to us, they have a loved one at home on a ventilator with a tracheostomy. Sometimes it's only a tracheostomy, and sometimes our clients don't have a tracheostomy, but they are requiring BiPAP ventilation or CPAP ventilation without tracheostomy. And sometimes our clients are not even ventilated, but they are medically very complex, and they do need ICU or pediatric ICU nurses 24 hours a day because of their medical complexities, and often it is to manage their unstable airways. And again, that is a very specialized skill that can only be handled by intensive care and pediatric intensive care nurses. So a situation that we see over and over again is that ventilated clients are at home with support workers or carers, and support workers or carers, quite frankly, can't safely handle ventilated patients with tracheostomy. So why do I say that? If you look at a hospital environment, any ventilated patient is in intensive care. They're not on a general ward because a ventilated patient, whether it's with a tracheostomy or with a breathing tube or non-invasively ventilated such as BiPAP or CPAP, needs intensive care nurses and intensive care doctors full stop, because it's actually considered life support. There is absolutely no room for negotiation here. It's a specialist skill. It's life support. People are on life support, and that's why they go into intensive care, or they go home on life support with a service like intensive care at home. So why would anybody in their right mind send a support worker or a carer into somebody's home when somebody's on a ventilator or medically very complex? That is simply, I argue, it's a criminal act. It's negligence, it's medical negligence. That's how I see the situation there. Because even in a hospital or even at home, not even a general nurse is capable of looking after ventilated patients with a tracheostomy, because it's a specialist intensive care or pediatric intensive care nursing skill. So the reasons why sometimes ventilated patients end up with support workers or carers at home in the community is simply that most people that are dealing with the funding of those clients are not medically competent, and they're not medically trained. They just look at it from a business perspective. Whilst we can cut the cost of an intensive care bed by 50% safely, we certainly can't cut the cost of an intensive care bed by 80%. That's just not doable, and it's not safe, and it's costing lives. If you do that, you're putting lives at risk. And we know for a fact, we have evidence that people have died at home on ventilation with tracheostomy, and even without ventilation, just with a tracheostomy, because they were looked after by support workers instead of intensive care nurses. We have evidence that people have more readmissions back into ICU when they're being looked after by support workers or by general nurses that have no ICU training, as opposed to being looked after by us when we have intensive care nurses 24 hours a day. Now, don't get me wrong, this is a reasonably high risk for us as well, looking after ventilated patients at home, because people at the end of the day are on life support. But it's a risk that we believe we can manage much better with a team of highly skilled, highly experienced, and highly experienced intensive care nurses. And also, we are having third-party accreditation to manage intensive care patients at home. So the government has, or we are providing all the skills, knowledge, policies and procedures that get us to third-party accreditation for intensive care at home, just like hospitals have third-party accreditation. Now, any support worker agency, generally speaking, has no accreditation whatsoever to look after ventilated patients. That's why I keep saying it's medical negligence. I do believe it's a criminal act. In our service, intensive care at home, as a matter of fact, we're employing hundreds of years intensive care nursing experience. That also includes pediatric intensive care nursing experience. So compare that to a support worker. I mean, anybody can be a support worker. You can literally pick people off the street and put them in an environment where they look after ventilated patients, but they have no idea what they're doing. But that is actually what's often happening in reality. And again, we have evidence that people have died because of this lack of skills in a home care environment. The other issue is that community care simply doesn't have the lobby that hospitals or intensive care units have. And we are certainly trying to get quality standards into home care when it comes to ventilation and tracheostomy and medical complexities where ICU nurses are required. So how do we do that? Quite simply, as I alluded to earlier, we have third-party accreditation for intensive care at home nursing. And I argue that we're looking after the highest acuity clients in the community in Australia. There is no other service that can look after sicker clients in the community than we do, because again, we have the third-party accreditation, we have the know-how, we have the policies and procedures, and we also have the hundreds of years of intensive care nursing experience employed in our service that makes that possible. So go and have a look at our website under the accreditation section, and you can see our third-party accreditation there. Furthermore, we are providing evidence-based care, meaning that research has gone into what is the safest option to take ventilated patients with a tracheostomy home. And the research and the evidence is clearly showing that the only way to look after ventilated patients with tracheostomy at home is with intensive care and pediatric intensive care nurses that have a minimum of 2 years ICU experience. That has been documented in the mechanical home ventilation guidelines that we have published on our website. Other services have no expertise in this whatsoever. They just go with what's given without even knowing what they're doing. Another issue that we're finding is that people who are in charge of funding simply don't understand the medical complexities. They just look at a business case without looking at a clinical case. And most people that we have found that deal with funding are not doctors, they're not nurses, they simply don't know what they don't know. And one of the recommendations that I have for anybody watching or listening to this or reading this is simply, you need to come to us for advocacy, because we've been there. We've helped our clients to get funding that they need for their medical complexities, for the ventilation, tracheostomy. Again, it's an intensive care nursing skill and nothing else. So if you're at home and you're finding you have insufficient support, insufficient funding, if you're finding that your support workers are not showing up, they're pulling out of shifts, or they simply don't know what they're doing, we've seen all of this before. Why are they pulling out of shifts? Well, if they get paid $20, $25 an hour and they're looking after somebody on life support, that's dangerous. And they could work for the same amount of money and stock some shelves in a supermarket and not have somebody's life in their hands. So again, I do believe that looking after ventilated patients in the community with support workers is simply dangerous. I do believe it's a criminal act, and anybody that's responsible for that needs to take accountability for it. Also, there is no supportive evidence or guidelines around support workers or even general nurses being able, safe and competent to look after ventilated patients at home. And there never will be, because it would be like flying an airplane with a stewardess instead of the trained pilot. No amount of training for the stewardess can replace a trained pilot to fly an airplane. So again, if you're finding you have support workers in the home, they are unreliable, they're pulling out of shifts, those are the reasons why they're doing this. And if you need more help and you need more funding to get a service like intensive care at home, you should contact us as soon as possible, because I can show you how to take the next steps. I really hope that helps. If you have any questions, please let me know. Now, if you have a loved one in intensive care and you want to go home with our service, intensive care at home, and if you want to find out how to get funding for our service and how it all works, please contact us on one of the numbers on the top of our website, or simply send me an email to patrick@intensivecareathome.com. Please also have a look at our case studies, because there we highlight more about what we can do for our clients, how clients can live at home with ventilation and tracheostomies, and you can look at our case studies as well as our service section. And if you're at home already and you need more support for your critically ill loved one, and if you have insufficient support or insufficient funding, please contact us. We can help you with all of that. And if you are an intensive care nurse or a pediatric intensive care nurse with a minimum of 2 years ICU or pediatric ICU experience, and you ideally have a critical care certificate, please contact us as well. Check out our career section on our website. We are currently hiring ICU and pediatric ICU nurses for clients in the Melbourne metropolitan area, northern suburbs, Sunbury, Mornington Peninsula, Frankston area, South Gippsland, as well as Wollongong in New South Wales. We are also an NDIS, TAC and DVA approved community service provider in Australia. Also have a look at our range of full service provisions. We also have been part of the Royal Melbourne Health Accelerator program in the past for innovative healthcare companies. Thank you for watching this video, and thank you for tuning into this week's blog. This is Patrick Hutzel from Intensive Care at Home, and I'll talk to you in a few days.